Hi, you're in class with Dr. T. Today I want to talk about the polycultural origins of jazz, a journey through New Orleans and beyond. Jazz, often held as America's quintessential musical genre, is a product of polycultural origins. Emerging in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, jazz was born in New Orleans, a city known for its cultural diversity, vibrant port activity, and complex social dynamics. Jazz development was deeply influenced by a confluence of African, Caribbean, European, and American traditions, each contributing unique elements to the music. I will explore in this video essay the polycultural origins of jazz. Jazz, like all great cultural art forms, are made through diversity, not purity. And I want to emphasize that. Jazz, like all great cultural art forms, are made through diversity and not purity, thus the polycultural aspect. In fact, all different cultural reference points are what makes art form great, right? So different cultural reference points are what makes art forms great. So let's examine the roots of jazz in New Orleans, its working class and middle class beginnings, the role of African Americans and Caribbean immigrants, the influence of blues, European melodies, and Italian opera, and the pivotal role of venues like brothels in shaping the genre. Finally, I will highlight the pioneers of jazz. I will just talk about a few. There are so many, but I'll just touch upon a few. New Orleans is situated at the mouth of the Mississippi River. That's very important to know in the late 19th and early 20th century, because it was there that there was a melting pot of cultures, making it the perfect incubator for a new musical genre. As a major port city, New Orleans was a hub for trade, attracting people from all over the world. Of course, people of African descent were already there, vis-a-vis the slave trade. Also, Caribbeans, mainly Caribbeans of African descent or of mixed African descent. And there was this European and Latin American influence. This cultural diversity created an environment where different musical traditions could interact, merge, and evolve. The city's Creole population, Creole being people of Spanish, French, mixed with African ancestry, many coming vis-a-vis the Caribbean, are an essential part of the development of jazz. These so-called Creoles of color in particular were more likely to have access to education and in many cases were trained in classical European music. Creoles from New Orleans, with their European mixed with African and native heritage, often sought to preserve their cultural identity, emphasizing their European lineage, although most of these French or Spanish speaking people had African ancestry. Many wished to be perceived as part of a unique, refined social class, different from, in particular, African Americans. Indeed, this had been the custom under Spanish and French rule. Before the United States bought Louisiana from the French, it was controlled by the Spanish. So the Spanish and French had colonized what is today Louisiana, thus bringing their respective traditions and also bringing their ideas in peculiar racial hierarchies. The idea that people of European descent were better than non-Europeans, as a way in particular to justify slavery, was a residue that Creoles embraced for the most part. Creoles, who came from a long line of free people, aimed to maintain a higher social status and avoid the stigma associated with slavery or those descended from slavery. However, when the segregation laws or Jim Crow laws came about in the late 19th century and really became solidified in the early 20th century, being of partial African ancestry or Spanish or French ancestry made no difference if you had a little bit of African ancestry. And so, in a very practical way, African Americans and Creoles all became Black. So, races are tricky. We have to remember it's a racial construct. Race is a social construct, we have to remember that. But to be clear, the port of New Orleans was essential to the development of jazz. As a major trading hub, it brought together a wide range of peoples and cultures, each contributing to the city's vibrant musical landscape. Therefore, the musicians and fans of this new irreverent sound were often more than willing to mix and mingle, right? So you have those kind of contradictory things happening. You have on the one hand this tension between African Americans and Creoles, but on the other hand you have this great unifier, jazz. With sailors, merchants, and immigrants to boot, also mixing in this rich soup of different ingredients. They brought new instruments, rhythms, and melodies, which local musicians incorporated into their performances. The constant flow of people and goods through the port also meant that New Orleans was exposed to the latest musical trends from Europe and the Caribbean in particular. This exchange of ideas and styles helped shape the early sound of jazz, making it a truly global music genre from the outset. Jazz originated in working class neighborhoods of New Orleans, particularly in the city's red light district, such as Storyville. This vibrant area, known for its lively nightlife, brothels, and saloons, became a melting pot where African American musicians blended ragtime, blues, and brass band traditions. A mix of cultural influences in Storyville, along with the creative freedom of the musicians, played a crucial role in shaping the improvisational and rhythmic elements that became the foundation of jazz music. The district's vibrant energy and diverse community were instrumental in the birth of this iconic American genre. Storyville was a highly diverse district where people from various culture and ethnic backgrounds, including African Americans, Creoles, and European immigrants, mingled. This diversity fostered a unique cultural exchange, allowing different musical traditions and styles to blend, which was crucial in the development of jazz. The district's mix of social clubs, of social classes, the district's mix of social classes and professions also contribute to its rich cultural tapestry. Here, music was a vital part of social life, with musicians performing in brothels, saloons, and dance halls. The music that emerged in these venues was raw, energetic, improvisational, reflecting the everyday experiences of the working class African American community. However, jazz was not solely the product of the working class. The middle class Creoles of color, a distinct group of this mix of French, Spanish, and African ancestry, also played a significant role in its development. This is not to say that all the African Americans were poor and all the Creole were middle class, but disproportionately, it is true that Creoles usually had more access to a higher socioeconomic status, which allowed them to have access to education and classical music training. That's key. These musicians, who were usually classically trained, brought technical skill and sophistication to jazz that helped elevate the genre. They combined their knowledge of European music traditions with African American music rhythms and improvisational styles, creating a unique sound that would become a hallmark of jazz, blending the precision of European forms with the expressive freedom of African American culture. African Americans from the South were central to the creation of jazz. They brought with them the musical traditions of their ancestors, including work songs, spirituals, and field hollers. These forms of music were characterized by complex rhythms, call and response patterns, and a strong emphasis on improvisation, all key elements of jazz. The Great Migration, which saw millions of African Americans move from the rural South to urban areas in the North and West. And by the way, many in the South often moved to other bigger urban cities, like New Orleans. They played a crucial role in the spread of jazz. As Africans moved to cities to the Midwest, like Chicago, to the East, like New York, and to the West, like Los Angeles, they brought jazz with them, helping to popularize the genre across the country. The blues were another critical component in the development of jazz. Originating in the African American communities of the South, the blues were a form of music that expressed the hardships and struggles of everyday life. The blues were characterized by simple, repetitive chord progressions, a focus on individual expression, and the use of the blue notes. Pitches that are slightly lower to create a sense of melancholy or longing. Jazz musicians adopted the blues' emphasis on personal expression and improvisation, incorporating these elements into their music. The blues also provided the harmonic foundation for many jazz compositions, with the 12-bar blues progression becoming a standard form in jazz music. Caribbean immigrants also played a significant role in the development of jazz. New Orleans' proximity to the Caribbean meant that there was a constant exchange of people and ideas between the two regions. Many Caribbean musicians, particularly from places like Cuba, Haiti, and the French West Indies, brought with them a rich tradition of rhythmically complex music, which deeply influenced the development of jazz. Caribbean musicians introduced new rhythms and instruments such as the clave and the conga drum to New Orleans music scene. These elements were incorporated into jazz, giving the music its distinctive syncopated rhythms and driving beats. Notably, Caribbean musicians who contributed to the development of jazz included Jelly Roll Morton, which I'll speak a little bit about more lately, who claimed Haitian Creole ancestry. And Manuel Perez, not so well known in the jazz era, and particularly the early 20th century, but he played a great role in New Orleans. And he was a band leader of Cuban descent. The role of European melodies and Italian opera, European music, played a significant role in shaping jazz. Many Creole musicians in New Orleans were trained in classical European music, including opera. They brought a sense of melody, harmony, and formal structure to jazz, which helped to balance the genre's improvisational nature. Italian opera, known for its expressive melodies and dramatic flair, influenced the way jazz musicians approach their performances. Jazz musicians often borrowed melodic lines from operatic arias, adapting them to the syncopated rhythms and bluesy harmonies of jazz. The incorporation of European melodies and forms into jazz helped to elevate the genre, making it appealing to a broader audience, including the middle and upper classes. Brothels and blue districts played a crucial role in the development of jazz in the early 20th century. Storyville, New Orleans' red light district, was a hotbed of musical activity. Musicians were in high demand to entertain patrons in the district's numerous brothels, saloons, and cabarets. These venues provided a space where musicians could experiment with new sounds and styles, blending elements of blues, ragtime, and European music into their performances. The informal nature of these performances encouraged improvisation, which became a defining characteristic of jazz. Storyville was also a place where musicians from different cultural backgrounds could interact and learn from each other. This cross-cultural exchange was essential to the development of jazz, right? So you had Southern black styles, Caribbean and European musical traditions into a cohesive whole. These musicians were exchanging ideas with one another and working together. Several pioneering musicians were instrumental in the development of jazz. Charles Buddy Bolden, born in New Orleans in 1877, is often credited as the first jazz musician. Raised in a working class African American family, Bolden grew up in a vibrant cultural environment that deeply influenced his musical style. He began playing the cornet as a teenager, though not apt at reading and writing music. He had an impeccable ear. He quickly gained a reputation for his loud, powerful sound and his innovative approach to music. Bolden's ability to improvise and blend different musical traditions, such as blues, ragtime, and gospel, set him apart from other musicians of his time. His performances, often described as energetic and raw, laid the groundwork for what would become the jazz genre. Bolden's contributions to music were profound, though his career was tragically cut short due to mental illness. Despite this, his legacy lives on as one of the founding figures of jazz, a distinctly American sound that continues to resonate today. Jelly Roll Morton, born Ferdinand Joseph Lamotte in New Orleans in 1890, was a Creole of color who played a crucial role in the early development of jazz. Growing up in a culturally rich and diverse environment, Morton was exposed to various musical influences, including ragtime, blues, and the syncopated rhythms of Caribbean music. His Creole background afforded him a unique perspective, blending African, French, and Spanish musical traditions. So, Jelly Roll Morton was Creole, but of Caribbean background. So you see some of how this works. And others like Bolden were African Americans and did not have access to the kind of education, at least musical education, that Jelly Roll Morton would have. But they are both integral players and key to this musical tradition. Morton was a skilled pianist, one of the first musicians to formalize jazz by writing down his compositions, which was a significant departure from the primarily improvisational nature of early jazz. His works, such as Jelly Roll Blues, helped establish the formal structure of jazz, while incorporating Caribbean rhythms and added a distinctive flavor to the genre. Morton's bold claim to have invented jazz reflects his deep confidence in his contribution, which undeniably helped shape jazz polycultural and dynamic nature as it evolved, right? This guy had a variety of different influences, and he's writing it down and he's documenting it. But the real star and legend who becomes the kind of face of the art form is Louis Armstrong.
One of America's most popular emissaries gets a warm reception as he arrives in the troubled Congo on a State Department-sponsored goodwill mission. Louis Satchmo Armstrong, whose golden...
An African American who was born in extreme poverty in New Orleans on August 4th, 1901. His upbringing in the rough neighborhood of Storyville was marked by hardship. His father abandoned the family when Louis was just an infant, and his mother often turned to prostitution to make ends meet. Despite these challenges, Armstrong found solace in music. His first significant break came when he was sent to Colored Waif's Home for Boys after allegedly firing a pistol in the air during a New Year's Eve celebration. The blend of influences, along with his charismatic stage presence and his gradually singing voice, allowed him to redefine the role of the soloist in jazz, moving the genre away from ensemble playing towards a focus on individual expression. But I might note, although there is this individual expression, jazz only works when it's played as a collective. But the beauty of the art form is that it allows the individual to thrive in the community, thus having that balance. That's important for us to understand that lesson because it may teach us about life. His innovations, Louis Armstrong's innovations in rhythm, phrasing, and improvisation, especially his ability to manipulate and stretch time, made him a groundbreaking figure. Armstrong's recording with the Hot Five and the Hot Seven included tracks like West End Blues, showcased his influence on the genre, blending technical mastery with emotional depth. Armstrong's impact on jazz was profound. He's the face of jazz, influenced not only his contemporaries, but also future generations of musicians across genres. Jazz eventually is going to have many different styles of playing. It was here that Armstrong was introduced to formal music training under the guidance of Peter Davis, the band director at the Home, who recognized his natural talent and taught him to play the cornet. Armstrong's early influences included the pioneering cornet player Buddy Bolden and the trumpet virtuoso of another great player, King Oliver, who became a mentor to Armstrong. Oliver invited him to join his Creole jazz band in Chicago in 1922, where Armstrong quickly became a standout performer. Armstrong combined the New Orleans style of collective improvisation with his unique ability to play emotionally charged melodic solos. Armstrong's influence on jazz cannot be overstated. He transformed the genre from a group-oriented music to one that celebrated individual expression. Armstrong also helped to popularize jazz outside of New Orleans, right? Jazz is the national art form. Some have argued it's America's or the United States of America's national art form. In the 1920s, he moved to Chicago and later to New York, where he performed with some of the biggest names in jazz. Jazz origins are deeply polycultural. Jazz origins are deeply polycultural, reflecting the diverse influences that came together in New Orleans to create a uniquely American music genre. Creoles from Louisiana, who often sought to preserve their distinct cultural identity in part by emphasizing their European lineage vis-a-vis French or Spanish-speaking heritage, were instrumental in this art form, right? They were, this group with their inherent polycultural mix were at their best when they allowed for that polycultural culture to emerge in front. That is to say, that led their culture, that mix. And when they came together with African Americans who had the blues and spirituals and all kinds of other interesting art forms, with European classical and brass band traditions, with more mixes coming from this port city, this became an unstoppable art form. It's those mixtures that made this art form the force it is. And when people let go of their cultural prejudice and embraced it, these art forms become possible. I like to talk about music because I believe it gives us an expression of hope and of what a democratic and diverse world looks like, where we understand questions of race as something peripheral. What we embrace is our different cultures and our common humanity, and showing how we can work together. Thank you. Please subscribe to my channel and like it. Also comment, and let's start a discussion. Thank you.